When the billionaire's will was read, the entire fortune went to his brother. His widow got nothing. His daughter whispered one chilling sentence. Uncle forged Dad's will. That's when everything unraveled. Rain whispered against the tall windows of the Thornbridge estate as the guests gathered inside the walnut-paneled study. The air was thick with grief, tension, and the faint scent of expensive cigars. At the head of the room, a tall man with thinning silver hair, Attorney Merle Givens, cleared his throat. Beside him sat Wade Thornbridge, the late Nathaniel's younger brother, with a smug half-smile creeping up his face. His tailored navy suit and gold cufflinks gleamed, even in the dim light. On the opposite end of the room, Emery Thornbridge sat in a black dress that looked borrowed, her face pale and her arms protectively wrapped around her daughter, Blythe. The 9-year-old girl clung to her mother's waist, her big green eyes scanning the room nervously. Emery's mind was too clouded with loss to process the setting. Just a week ago, Nathaniel was alive, her husband, her protector, the father who kissed Blythe's forehead every morning and promised, "No matter what, I'll take care of you both." Now he was gone. A car crash, or so they said. The will reading began. Merle's voice was steady but emotionless, listing assets, holdings, and properties. Then came the line that shifted the room's energy like a sudden drop in barometric pressure. "To my beloved brother Wade Thornbridge," Merle read, "I leave the entirety of my estate, assets, business interests, and properties, both domestic and international." A sharp gasp rang out. Emery's. She leaned forward, stunned. That can't be right. That's not what he wanted. That's not what he said." Blythe looked up at her, confused and frightened. Wade smiled and leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "It's all right, Emery," he said, oozing condescension. "Nathaniel just wanted a streamlined plan. I'll make sure you and Blythe are looked after." Emery stared at him, her lips trembling. Her heart pounded. Nathaniel had promised Blythe would have a trust. He'd said Emery would co-chair the foundation they started together. He told her just a month ago that he'd rewritten the will. So why was the version being read now so different? But the attorney read on, never faltering, his face unreadable. No mention of Emery, no trust for Blythe, nothing for the daughter Nathaniel adored. After the reading, as the guests began to murmur and disperse, Emery stood frozen, gripping Blythe's hand. Her mind raced between shock and outrage, but she was too overwhelmed to argue then. She needed air. She needed space. She needed time to think. Wade approached her before she could leave. "You and the girl can stay in the guest house, for now," he said, already turning away, "until we figure out arrangements." That night, in the dim, cold guest house that once housed estate staff, Emery sat on the floor beside Blythe's small bed. The girl hadn't said much since the will reading, until now. She tugged on Emery's sleeve, her voice no louder than a breath. "Mommy," she whispered. Emery brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. "Yes, sweetheart?" "I saw Uncle Wade with Daddy's hand in the hospital. Daddy wasn't moving. But Uncle said, 'Just need the print, that's all.'" The room went still. Emery blinked. "What did you say?" Blythe repeated it carefully. Uncle Wade had Daddy's hand. He pressed it on paper. But Daddy was asleep. Like forever asleep. Emery's blood turned cold. She felt the edges of something dark start to form. Her daughter wasn't lying. Blythe never lied. And suddenly, a terrible question filled her mind. What if Nathaniel never signed that will at all? Emery didn't sleep that night. She sat in the armchair by the window, watching the branches sway in the wind and listening to every creak in the guest house walls. Blythe's words echoed relentlessly in her mind. Uncle Wade had Daddy's hand. Daddy wasn't moving. The image haunted her, Wade forging a signature from a lifeless hand. It sounded insane, but something deep in Emery's gut told her it wasn't. She could see it now. The smirk Wade wore during the will reading. The rushed funeral. The absence of any personal message from Nathaniel in the will. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was suspicion clawing its way towards certainty. As the sun rose, Emery made herself a cup of black coffee with shaking hands. Her phone sat on the counter, untouched for days. She had avoided everyone since Nathaniel's death, unable to endure the pitying looks or the empty condolences. But now, she scrolled through her contacts, her thumb hovering over a name she hadn't dialed in over a year: Silas Maddox. Silas was Nathaniel's former business partner. Cold, brilliant, private, and one of the only men Nathaniel ever truly respected. They had co-founded Thorntech before selling their first company for $500 million. Years later, they'd remained close. Even as Silas stepped away from public life, Emery hesitated. What would she even say? That her 9-year-old daughter saw something strange? That she suspected a billionaire forged his dead brother's will using a fingerprint? It sounded like madness, but the alternative, doing nothing, felt worse. She hit call. The phone rang twice. Then, Maddox. Silas, it's Emery. A pause. She imagined him sitting in a glass tower somewhere, tapping a pen on his desk. Emery, I was going to call you after the funeral, but I need to see you, she said quickly. Her voice cracked. It's about Nathaniel, about the will. Another pause, this time longer. Then, come to my place, Midtown, today. She exhaled for the first time in hours. Thank you. By early afternoon, Emery and Blythe arrived in Manhattan. Silas's penthouse sat 40 floors above the chaos of the city, sleek and modern, all steel and silence. The door opened before they knocked. Silas stood tall in dark slacks and a charcoal gray shirt, no tie, sleeves rolled. His face was sharper than she remembered, more drawn, more weary. But his eyes locked onto Emery's with startling intensity. Then they drifted down to Blythe, who clutched her mother's hand. Come in, he said. Inside, the city unfolded in floor-to-ceiling windows. Emery barely noticed the view. She sat on the leather couch, Blythe curled beside her, quiet. Silas poured her a glass of water but didn't speak. He just waited. Emery told him everything, about the will, Wade's sudden inheritance, and the strange absence of anything for Blythe. Then, shakily, she repeated what Blythe had said, every word. Silas listened without interruption. His expression didn't change, but something in the way he sat, the way his hand froze over the rim of his glass, told her he believed her more than he let on. When she finished, Blythe, unprompted, pulled a folded sheet of paper from her backpack. She'd drawn something with crayons. This is what I saw, she said softly. Silas took the paper. On it was a crude drawing of a hospital bed, a man lying still, and another man holding a sheet of paper with a red handprint on it. He stared at it for a long time. Then, without looking up, he said, I believe you. Emery blinked. You do? I always thought Wade was a snake. But this... He stood, suddenly all motion. If he forged Nathaniel's will, we can prove it. And if we can prove it, he's going to lose everything. He walked toward a cabinet and pulled out a laptop. I already have a PI watching Wade. I'll expand the investigation. I want hospital records, staff logs, security footage. We'll get the digital signature history, if it exists, and we'll check on the notary that signed the will. Emery watched him, stunned. Silas, why are you helping us? He paused. Because Nathaniel would have done the same for me. He turned to Blythe. And because your daughter just became the most important witness in a case that could shake an empire. Blythe looked up at him, confused, but comforted by his steady presence. Silas gave her a faint smile. Don't worry, kid, he said. We're going to make this right, all of it. The city lights outside Silas Maddox's penthouse glimmered like distant stars as the evening fell. But the atmosphere inside was dense with purpose. Emery sat cross-legged on the couch, watching Silas type rapidly across multiple screens. He was pulling up hospital data, legal records, and obscure notary logs. With the precision of someone used to tracking hidden figures and unraveling complex fraud. Blythe, curled up beside her mother with a blanket around her shoulders, had dozed off midway through the investigation. Her crayon drawing of the scene she remembered was still on Silas's desk, next to a steaming mug of untouched coffee. The paper seemed so innocent, yet it carried the weight of something devastating. An accusation only a child could make without bias, without fear. Silas zoomed in on a scanned copy of the will, eyes scanning the details. "This notary stamp," he muttered. "Marla Beck. But that's impossible." Emery leaned forward. "What is it?" "Marla Beck died 2 months before Nathaniel," he said, rotating the screen. "Car accident, verified obituary. But her stamp and name appear on this document, dated 5 days before Nathaniel's death." Emery's breath hitched. "So the notary is fake?" "Either someone used her old credentials or forged the whole thing outright." He looked up at her. "This alone could be enough to get the will thrown out. But we need more, a pattern, a motive, something concrete to tie Wade to the fraud." A sudden buzz came from Silas's encrypted phone. He answered with a clipped, "Go." It was his private investigator, Raina. Her voice was low and sharp. "I access Thornbridge Memorial's internal logs. There's a missing block of video between 9:42 and 10:15 p.m., the night Nathaniel died. It's the only gap in the entire hospital's camera system." Silas's brow furrowed. "And Wade was there that night?" "According to a parking log, yes. His car left at 10:21 p.m. No medical record of a visit. No entry signed. He wasn't a listed contact." Silas hung up, already pacing. "He scrubbed it. That's when he did it." Emery held her hands together tightly. "You think he went to the hospital, got Nathaniel's fingerprints somehow, and used it to sign the will?" Silas nodded grimly. "Or worse. He might have been there before Nathaniel passed. If your daughter saw what she says she did, then Wade didn't just forge a signature. He desecrated the body of his own brother." Emery covered her mouth, horrified. A sudden knock at the penthouse door shattered the moment. Silas's head snapped toward it. He rarely got visitors unannounced. He signaled for Emery to stay back and opened a drawer, removing a sleek black handgun, which he held low at his side as he moved toward the door. Peering through the security lens, he relaxed only slightly. It was a courier, holding a slim envelope. Silas opened the door just wide enough to receive it, his eyes scanning the man's badge. Once the door was shut, Silas opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a glossy photo and a typed message. "Tell the widow to drop it, or the girl gets to see what real loss is." The color drained from Silas's face. Emery stood instantly, feeling his change in energy. "What is it?" He hesitated, then handed her the photo. It was a grainy picture of Blythe on the sidewalk earlier that day, holding Emery's hand, her hair in pigtails. Emery's knees buckled. "Oh, God!" Silas caught her before she collapsed. "This changes everything. This is now a threat to a minor. We involve the feds." But Emery shook her head, eyes fierce. "No police. If Wade knows we're building a case, he'll disappear and take the money with him. I want him to pay. Publicly. The way Nathaniel deserved." Silas studied her face and nodded slowly. "Then we do it my way. Quietly, thoroughly, and fast." He picked up his phone. "Get me a cyber forensics expert, and triple the surveillance on Blythe and Emery. I want eyes on every asset Wade touches. We're going to dismantle him from the inside." As Emery held her daughter close that night, she whispered into her ear, "Daddy loved you. And I swear, baby, we're going to fix what they've done." She didn't notice Silas watching from the doorway, jaw set, eyes burning with silent rage. He wasn't doing this just for justice anymore. He was doing it for them. The next morning brought no peace. Emery awoke on the couch in Silas's penthouse, a stiff neck and dry mouth reminding her she hadn't truly slept. Blythe was still curled under a thick throw blanket, hugging a stuffed fox Silas had given her the night before. Emery quietly walked into the kitchen where Silas was already pacing, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in a clipped tone. "They threatened a child," he snapped. "I want every movement traced. Credit cards, burner phones, hidden accounts, and check the Bahamas accounts Wade opened back in 2023. If he's planning to run, we'll catch it there. He ended the call and turned to Emery. Wade's trying to shut this down, fast, but he made a mistake by sending that photo. That's a federal felony. I'm bringing in an investigator from the Treasury Department, off the books. Emery nodded silently, wrapping her arms around herself. How can someone do this to family? Nathaniel trusted him. Wade was always a parasite, Silas replied. He just hid it better than most. Nathaniel couldn't see it, but I did. As the day progressed, Silas's office became a command center. Surveillance footage was pulled from backup servers. A cyber forensics analyst recovered deleted call logs from the hospital's internal system, revealing a 13-minute call made from a nurse's station to an unregistered burner phone the night of Nathaniel's death. The pieces were falling into place, but it came at a cost. Late that evening, while Emery tried to distract Blythe with coloring books, Silas took a call from his PI in another room. His jaw clenched as he listened. "She what?" he said, voice dropping to a deadly tone. "When?" He walked out of the room and quietly knelt beside Emery. Wade paid off a nurse, Cynthia Porter. She was the last person in the room with Nathaniel, before the signature appeared on the will. Emery stiffened. "Where is she now?" "She went on emergency leave 2 days ago. We think she's been moved, possibly hidden. But we found her sister, and the sister said Cynthia came home crying the night Nathaniel died. Said she didn't want to help him anymore, even for the money." "Silas," Emery whispered, "what if Nathaniel wasn't dead yet?" His eyes met hers. "That's what I'm starting to believe." There was a long silence before he added, "We need to move. Wade won't wait. He knows we're close." But just then, as if summoned by tension itself, Emery's phone buzzed. A message from a blocked number. "You're being watched. Stop digging." She showed it to Silas immediately. "We're done playing safe," he said. The next day, Emery and Blythe were moved to a secured luxury apartment Silas kept under an alias. It was modern, armored, and discreet. 2 armed guards were stationed inside, another 2 outside. Silas upgraded Blythe's school to private home tutoring and gave Emery a phone with military-grade encryption. Meanwhile, Silas had Wade's financial activity monitored in real time. The team uncovered a recent wire transfer, $850,000 to a shell company based in Nevada, and that company paid a security firm, which just so happened to provide private recovery services to wealthy clients. Silas slammed the file on his desk. He's hiring people to destroy evidence and silence witnesses. But the final piece came 3 days later. A whistleblower inside the law firm that prepared the will sent an anonymous tip. The digital record of the will had been backdated. The actual file was created after Nathaniel's death. Silas printed it out and handed it to Emery. This, combined with Blythe's testimony, the notary's death, and the nurse's disappearance, is enough to contest the will in court. Emery exhaled sharply. "Then we fight." Silas placed a hand on her shoulder. "And we win." She looked back at him, something shifting between fear and fierce resolve. "We'll do it for Nathaniel, for Blythe, for the truth." As Emery walked back into the living room where Blythe sat drawing, Silas remained at the window, looking down over the city. Somewhere out there, Wade was still smiling, still thinking he'd gotten away with it. But not for long. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the benches in the back. Cameras banned, but not their whispers. The Thornbridge estate scandal had gripped every media outlet in the Northeast. Tech tycoon's widow challenges billion-dollar will made headlines from coast to coast. But Emery wasn't there for cameras. She was there for justice. She sat at the plaintiff's table in a navy dress, composed but visibly exhausted. Beside her, Blythe sat still, small hands folded in her lap, trying to be brave, and flanking them like a stone wall was Silas Maddox. He wore a dark suit, his eyes like ice, focused only on Wade Thornbridge seated across the room. Wade looked smug, if slightly more nervous than usual. He leaned toward his attorney and whispered something, flashing a brief smirk toward Emery and Blythe. It was the smile of a man still convinced of his invincibility. He didn't know what was coming. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Then the hearing began. Emery's lawyer, Marla Jensen, a former federal prosecutor, stood and made her opening remarks, calm, surgical, and sharp. Your Honor, we intend to prove that the last will and testament presented by Wade Thornbridge is a fabrication, that he forged our client's late husband's signature, after death, using a fingerprint, that the notary who allegedly authenticated the will was already deceased, that surveillance footage was deliberately deleted, and that a key hospital witness was paid and then disappeared. And finally, we will present testimony from the victim's daughter, who was in the room when the forgery took place. Gasps rippled through the room. The judge raised his eyebrows but said nothing. Wade's lawyer, a polished man in an overpriced suit, tried to dismiss it as a grief-driven fantasy cooked up by a woman desperate for relevance. But that arrogance evaporated the moment Silas took the stand. He laid out the facts with precision. The payments, the timeline, the metadata from the will file. His voice didn't waver once. Wade Thornbridge had motive, opportunity, and financial interest. Everything about the will contradicts the late Mr. Thornbridge's written communications, business protocols, and family promises. This was not an oversight, it was a betrayal. Then came the key moment. Emery stood slowly and walked Blythe up to the witness box. The court hushed. The judge looked down kindly. Blythe, do you promise to tell the truth? The girl nodded, clutching her stuffed fox in one hand as she was sworn in. Marla approached gently. Blythe, can you tell us what you saw the night your dad passed away? Blythe looked at her mother, then to Silas. Then she took a breath. I was in the hospital room. Daddy wasn't moving. I thought he was sleeping. But then Uncle Wade came in with a lady in a white coat. She said, he's already gone. But Uncle Wade said, I just need the print. He took Daddy's hand and pressed it on paper. And then he smiled. The room went silent. The court reporter's fingers stopped typing for a second. Did your dad say anything at all? Marla asked gently. No, Blythe said, her voice trembling. He was very still. He didn't even blink. And how did you feel? Blythe looked down. Scared. The judge leaned back, clearly shaken. Wade stood suddenly. This is outrageous! You're going to believe a child with crayons over documented legal work? The judge banged the gavel. Mr. Thornbridge, sit down. Wade's own lawyer looked horrified, but the final blow came when a surprise witness walked into the courtroom. Nurse Cynthia Porter. Silas had tracked her down the night before, offering her full legal protection in exchange for testimony. She walked up, pale but composed. Mr. Wade Thornbridge paid me $100,000 to let him into Nathaniel Thornbridge's hospital room after hours. Nathaniel was already gone. He had me place ink on his thumb and then help press it on a sheet of paper. I didn't know what I was doing at first, but when I saw the document title, I panicked. I left. I've been hiding since. No one in the courtroom spoke. The judge exhaled heavily and said, I've heard enough. By that afternoon, the will was declared null and void. Wade's access to all assets was immediately frozen, and a full federal investigation was opened. As they exited the courthouse, the crowd of reporters rushed forward, but Silas blocked the way. He wrapped his arm around Emery and placed his hand protectively on Blythe's shoulder. The press shouted questions, but all Emery said was, The truth always has a voice, even a small one. Silas leaned down and whispered to Blythe, You did something today grown men wouldn't dare. And for the first time in weeks, Blythe smiled. The fallout was immediate and seismic. Within 24 hours of the judge nullifying the forged will, federal agents raided Wade Thornbridge's office and personal residence. News outlets flooded with images of boxes labeled evidence being carried out of his modernist mansion. The Department of Justice announced a full investigation into Wade for fraud, conspiracy, witness intimidation, and tampering with the deceased person. But Emery wasn't watching the news. She was finally back inside the main Thornbridge estate, her home, with Blythe, walking room to room as if rediscovering a memory that had been locked away. The air still smelled faintly of Nathaniel's cologne in his old study. She stood there, her fingers grazing the back of his chair, breathing deeply. For the first time since his death, she felt something like peace rising up inside her, though it was tangled with sorrow. Blythe ran through the halls barefoot, laughing as she rediscovered the secret passage behind the library shelf that Nathaniel used to call the Adventure Tunnel. Emery watched her, hand over her heart, tears springing to her eyes. Silas arrived later that afternoon, sleeves rolled, tie undone, carrying a manila folder and the weight of fresh developments. He walked straight to Emery in the study. "You won't believe how deep this went," he said quietly, placing the folder on the desk. Inside were financial printouts, Shell Corporation diagrams, and transfer receipts. Wade wasn't just stealing from Nathaniel. He was planning to liquidate everything and flee to Dubai under a new identity. He would have disappeared if we hadn't moved when we did. Emery shook her head, overwhelmed. He would have left Blythe with nothing. He would have erased Nathaniel's legacy. He tried, Silas replied. But he failed. There was a pause between them. Emery looked up at Silas with searching eyes. I never got to say goodbye to Nathaniel. Not properly. Not without fear or confusion in my head. I just kept asking myself, what if I'd seen it sooner? What if I'd fought harder from the start? Silas stepped forward, his voice firm. You protected your daughter. You followed your instincts. You trusted your child when others would have ignored her. That's not failure, Emery. That's love. The kind that changes everything. Before she could respond, Blythe burst in, holding something shiny in her hand. Look what I found! She exclaimed. It was a locket, Nathaniel's. Inside was a picture of Blythe as a toddler on one side, and Emery holding her on the other. Tucked behind the photo was a tiny folded note in Nathaniel's handwriting. Emery opened it with trembling fingers. If anything happens to me, trust Silas. He'll protect you both. Love doesn't die, Emery. It just becomes invisible. Yours forever, N. Emery broke down in tears, pressing the note to her chest. Silas took a step closer, but said nothing. Later that evening, as dusk bathed the estate in warm amber light, Silas walked the grounds with Blythe. She picked wildflowers along the path and asked him questions about space and stars and how lawyers made lies disappear. He laughed softly. Not all of them do, but sometimes the truth gets lucky and finds people brave enough to carry it. She handed him a flower. Like Mommy? Like both of you, he said. As they reached the hill behind the house, Blythe suddenly asked, Are you going to stay with us forever? Silas hesitated, taken off guard. Do you want me to? She nodded without a second thought. You're safe, and you listen. That night, after Emery tucked Blythe into bed, she walked onto the back veranda where Silas stood, hands in his pockets, looking out at the dark sky. She asked if you'd stay forever, she said gently. He looked at her, unsure. What did you say? I didn't say anything yet. I thought I'd ask you first. The silence stretched between them, but it was warm now, not strained. Silas nodded slowly, his voice low. I've built a lot of things in my life, but this feels like the first one that matters. Emery stepped closer, her hand slipping into his. Then maybe it's time we stop surviving and start living again. And for the first time since Nathaniel's death, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt full. The seasons shifted. Summer faded into a crisp autumn, painting the trees around the Thornbridge estate in brilliant reds and golds. Life slowly returned to something resembling normal, though Emery knew it would never be the same again. Still, it wasn't grief that ruled the house anymore. It was healing. Laughter echoed in the halls again. Blythe returned to school, this time in a nurturing private academy Silas quietly arranged and funded. The security detail remained in place, but discreet now, like a shadow no longer threatening. Wade, on the other hand, was unraveling. His indictment came quickly, and the charges stacked like bricks. Will forgery, fraud, obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, attempted estate theft, and conspiracy. A swarm of civil lawsuits followed, including one from the Thornbridge Foundation itself, now revived under Emery's leadership. His legal team was gutted. His reputation was dust. As his bail was revoked and he was remanded into federal custody, Wade finally realized the one truth he had underestimated: no one would protect him anymore. The media circus quieted over time, but the story left ripples throughout the corporate world. Nathaniel Thornbridge's name was cleared publicly. His legacy was restored, and for the first time in months, Emery didn't wake up with dread pressing on her chest. She spent more and more time with Silas, at first in meetings and planning sessions, then over quiet dinners, long walks through the estate gardens, and eventually evenings by the fire where words gave way to silence, and silence gave way to something deeper. Their connection had shifted gently and without force, growing out of trust, respect, and a shared sense of protection over Blythe. One weekend, Silas invited Emery and Blythe to a private cabin in the Berkshires, a place Nathaniel had once dreamed of taking his family before the world became too busy. There, in the quiet hum of nature and under skies full of stars, something unspoken found breath. On the second night, as Blythe slept curled beside the fireplace, Emery sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket. Silas joined her, holding 2 mugs of hot cider. "She really trusts you," Emery said softly. "I trust her more than most adults I've met," he replied, handing her a mug. "She sees people, the truth in them." Emery glanced sideways. "She asked me again yesterday. About me staying forever?" She nodded. She said, "If he goes, the house will feel too big again." Silas smiled faintly. "It's already hard to imagine leaving. I never expected that." Emery stared out at the dark forest, her voice quiet. "I think Nathaniel knew. Why else would he write that note? Leave that locket? He trusted you with everything, even us." Silas looked down, the weight of that trust written across his face. "I loved him like a brother. But what I'm feeling now, for you, for her, it's not about loyalty. It's something new, something I didn't think I'd ever deserve." Emery turned to him, tears in her eyes, but not from sadness. "You're already part of us, Silas. You've been from the moment you listened to her, when no one else would." He took her hand and brought it to his lips, his voice barely audible. "Then let me stay. Let me build something real with you, with her." She nodded slowly, eyes locked on his. "Stay." When they returned to the estate 2 days later, Blythe came running to the front door, holding a drawing she made. In it she'd drawn 3 stick figures: her, Emery, and Silas, all holding hands under the sun. In the sky above she'd written in bold crayon, "We're safe now, Daddy's watching, and love is here." Silas knelt and pulled her into a hug. And just like that, the Thornbridge home, once broken by betrayal, stood stronger than it ever had before. The winter gala of the newly re-established Thornbridge Children's Foundation was held in the grand ballroom of the estate, the very one Wade had once reserved for his own extravagant business parties. Now it was transformed. Candlelight shimmered against restored crystal chandeliers, music played softly from a live string quartet, and the halls were filled not with shareholders and social climbers, but with educators, doctors, and children whose lives had been touched by the Foundation's outreach programs. It was a night of meaning, not spectacle. Emery stood near the main staircase, dressed in a deep green gown that Nathaniel once said made her look like something from a dream. Her hair was pinned simply, her expression composed, but her eyes carried the glow of someone who had walked through fire and emerged stronger. Blythe was not far, wearing a silver dress and red ribbon in her hair, fluttering between guests and clinging proudly to the arm of Silas, who looked both out of place and entirely at home in a tailored black tuxedo. This was the first public appearance for all 3 of them since the trial ended. There had been whispers and speculation about their closeness, about Silas stepping into the role Wade tried to steal, not as a replacement for Nathaniel, but as someone who honored him by protecting what he loved most. Emery took the stage just as dessert was being cleared. The room quieted. attention naturally drawn to her grace and presence. "Good evening," she began, her voice calm but rich with emotion. "A year ago tonight, my daughter and I were preparing for the funeral of a man the world called a titan. But to us, he was just Daddy, my husband. The man who built this place not from concrete or wood, but from purpose. Nathaniel believed in children, in potential, in the idea that no voice is too small to change the world." She paused, eyes drifting to Blythe. "And this year my daughter reminded me of that. When everything around us was falling apart, she told the truth. Not because she understood what was at stake, but because she knew what was right. And tonight, because of that truth, we begin again." Applause rose slowly, deeply, spreading across the room. Blythe smiled shyly and looked up at Silas, who squeezed her hand. Emery continued. "None of this would be possible without the courage of a child, the integrity of those who stood beside us, and the man who stepped in, not to replace what we lost, but to help protect what remained." Her eyes met Silas's. "Tonight we celebrate healing. We celebrate the return of what was almost stolen. And most of all, we honor love that doesn't vanish when someone dies. It simply finds a new way to shine." She stepped down from the stage, the room on their feet in applause. Silas met her at the bottom of the stairs, offering his arm. She took it without hesitation. Outside in the frost-covered gardens, the three of them stood together later that night, gazing at the stars above. Emery pulled her shawl tighter, and Blythe leaned against her. Silas held both close. "I used to think," Emery whispered, "that justice would feel like victory, but it feels more like breath, like safety, like home." Silas nodded. "Because it's not revenge, it's restoration. You built something new from the ruins." Blythe looked up, her breath visible in the cold air. "Do you think Daddy sees us now?" Emery didn't answer right away. Then she turned toward her daughter and smiled. "I think he never stopped." They stood in silence under the moonlight, not as victims of betrayal, but as a family reborn. And far above them, somewhere in the still sky, it felt like someone was watching with peace in his heart. In my view, the ending of this story is both redemptive and quietly profound. What began as a tale of betrayal, grief, and unimaginable injustice transformed into something much more powerful, a story about the resilience of love, the bravery of truth, and the healing that comes when justice is not only served, but done with heart. Blythe's voice, innocent yet unwavering, became the catalyst that exposed corruption in the face of overwhelming power. Emery's strength, once buried beneath sorrow, rose with quiet fury and motherly instinct. And Silas, a man built from logic and solitude, allowed himself to feel, to protect, and ultimately to love again, not as a replacement for Nathaniel, but as a guardian of his legacy and the future he left behind. I find the most beautiful part of the ending to be its restraint. It doesn't celebrate victory in a loud, triumphant way. It honors the silent, courageous choices that rebuilt what greed tried to destroy. A child's whisper uncovered a lie. A family's bond became stronger than wealth. And love, unexpected, steady, and real, became the final answer to a story that could have ended in ruin. It reminds us that even when everything seems lost, truth has a way of finding light. And when it does, it doesn't just expose darkness, it replaces it.